everybody's year been?
It's early. It's early.
It's early. It's been batshit crazy. You know, it's been that way when yesterday I was awakened by a text on my phone from my son that said, "Hey Mom, you're viral on TikTok." The week before, I had the crew of Nightline in my living room for 9 hours. And the week before that, I was a guest on the Dr. Phil primetime show where I opened with the icebreaker of, "Do I smell like a skunk?" That's pretty much been my year so far, so I win. You win. So about 1 year ago today, literally almost to the day, I walked into one of my rental homes, and in a flood of breath, I slid across human feces, and fell headfirst into a trash bag filled with maggots. And at that moment, I declared revenge. You've heard the saying, revenge is a dish best served cold. Well, I started planning my dish right then. So what happened was, I had been told by a friend of mine, who happens to be sitting here in the audience, Mandy, that, you know, Patty, when you retire, you should go into being a landlord. It'll be fun. It'll be easy. So my ex-husband's fiance and I, well, that's a sister-wife story for another. She and I invested in a couple of properties. And yeah, that started a year of fun. So when I was sitting in that house, surrounded by human poop, and the walls destroyed, and the windows gone, and the appliances gone, all because I had gotten squatters who lived in my house for 5 weeks and cost $40,000 worth of damage. I declared that I was going to get even. So here's what happened. About a year ago, last March, I was in bed, and we had decided to sell the house because landlording sucks. It sucks. And so I was sound asleep, and I had sent a handyman over to do a few last-minute little things on the house that we had gotten an offer for. And I get a phone call. And it's the handyman that said, "You know, Patty, I can't get in the house because there's a pit bull mother and 14 babies on the front porch." Well, that's not really what you want to hear when you're woken up by your handyman. So I zoomed out of bed, I got sleep crust in my eyes, and I'm still in my pajamas, and I drive a mile over to the house. And sure enough, there's pit bulls, a whole little family just living their best life right there. So I start to walk around the side of the house, and I see a car. And I couldn't go in the front door because, you know, pit bulls. And so I went around to the back, and I start to put the key in the door when it was like the scene out of a horror movie, you know, where some dumbass is about to open a door that you don't want him to, and you're like, "Don't open that door!" And it dawned on me, like, I probably shouldn't open this door. So instead I called 911 and told the police what was going on, and just as I was walking back around the front of the house, a woman comes out, and she walks up to me and she says, "Who are you and what are you doing here?" Well, I'm caffeine deprived and wiping the sleep out of my eyes, and I kind of meekly said, "Well, ma'am, I'm the owner, and who are you and what are you doing here?" And she immediately begins to launch into this very detailed story that she is given her rent and a pet deposit, and she and her wife have moved in, and here's the lease on her phone, and she rented it from Christopher Cross, and, you know, if I was going to have to evict her if I wanted her out. Well, I didn't know that the 70s pop star really needed to go into landlord. Sailing residuals weren't quite cutting it for him, but I said, well, I don't really understand because the house is not for sale, so I guess they're rent, so I guess we'll just have to let the police sort it out. So about that time, the police came up and he takes her statement, filled with lots and lots of details, all down to what the pop star was wearing when he rented the house to her. And he takes my statement, which more or less consisted of, I have no idea what's going on and I really need a cup of coffee. And he goes and gets in his car and starts doing some research while she and I have idle chit chat. Well, then he gets out of his car and he's got a very somber, just very, very, serious look, and he motions me to come over. And he said, ma'am, I've got some bad news and I've got some really bad news. I said, okay, what is it? There's no good news in there? And he said, ma'am, what you've got here are serial squatters. And then the next sentence is something you never want to hear a police officer say to you when you're asking them to solve a problem, which is, and I can do absolutely nothing for you. You see, in the state of Florida, and in fact 49 other states in the union, so if you're counting all of them, if you have some kind of form that says you are living in a house, fraudulent or not, signed by a singer or not, doesn't matter on the back of a Christmas card or a birthday card, it's the owner who has to prove that they're fraudulent, not them proving that they have a right to be there. Well, I couldn't believe this crazy shit. And so he told me, he said, you're going to have to go through a formal eviction procedure. And so I didn't know what to do with that, but I ended up calling an attorney and struck a check for $5,000 so he could start the eviction process. And by the way, I was informed that I had absolutely no rights on the property of the house, could not set foot on it, and I had to keep paying for electricity and water so they could live their best life in my home. So I did what anyone could do, which is I decided to make their life hell. And so I drove by the house multiple times a day, much to the attorney's chagrin and Dana's chagrin and all of my friends telling me not to do it. But I drove by there just obsessively. And we got into a few altercations. I got physically assaulted. They threatened me with a tire iron. They threw bricks at my car and dog poop at me. And my personal favorite, is they masturbated in front of me. Well, my only choice was to get a little bit of news and get a little bit of publicity. So the local news picked up, and then it went to Fox. And I became the Fox media darling for 5 or 6 months. But you know what?
Nothing wrong with that.
But you know what? Who watches Fox are all those people over in Tallahassee that make laws. And so a senator and a representative decided that they were going to take this on and they were going to write a law for anti-squatting, and they called and asked me if I could participate. So I got a chance to help write that bill, was honored to testify before the House and the Senate, and in 4 months we got the bill passed, bipartisan, 100% bipartisan, through the floor legislature. Signed that bill into law last week. And along the way, a little bit of infamy came. Inside Edition, Nightline, and my Nightline experience, that 9 hours more or less was about me standing for hours, walking back and forth, looking very contemplatively, and then putting my glasses down. Today's weird job. And then Dr. Phil called. Well, I was a little reticent because, Dr. Phil. But I was saying yes to everything. And so he flew me out there for 4 days of filming. Well, the night before before I was to film with a live studio audience. I'm sound asleep in my room. At about 4 a.m., I wake straight up out of that dead sleep because my room smells so bad. And it turns out, it's one of those where you look under the cover to see if, it's a Godfather moment, and I was really relieved I hadn't crapped myself. But it was a skunk. A skunk had relieved themselves, and it was in the intake valve, and so anyway, my clothes smell like skunk. So when I took the limo over to the studio, the first thing that I said when I met Dr. Phil, and he did that look, where it's like, do I smell like skunk? So anyway, 1 year later, I no longer smell like skunk. We've got a motherfucking bill that will keep house quiet. And now my flood of breath looks hopefully more like this than this. Yeah!